the long sweep of human history, there are eras that rise quietly, without dramatic beginnings, and yet transform the world so profoundly that every age afterward carries their imprint. The Bronze Age was among the most influential of these eras, unfolding gradually across continents, shaping the first great cities and setting in motion the rhythms of civilization that would echo for thousands of years. Long before iron was forged, long before classical empires rose in shining stone, the Bronze Age formed the foundation of ancient memory, a period when humans began to live in ways that felt connected to something larger, something enduring. This era did not begin suddenly in any one place. Instead, it emerged like dawn breaking over many horizons at once. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, in the fertile floodplains of Egypt, along the shores of the Aegean Sea, across the mountains of Anatolia, and in distant regions stretching toward China and the Indus, people discovered that copper and tin, when melted together, created a metal stronger than anything they had known before. This discovery unfolded quietly, yet its consequences reached far. Tools sharpened, weapons hardened, and artistry blossomed as metalworkers experimented with the shimmering new alloy. The earliest murmurs of the Bronze Age appeared in the 4th millennium BCE in Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers wound their slow paths through landscapes of reeds and fertile soil. Here stood some of the first cities on Earth, places like Uruk, Eridu, and Kish. These early urban centers hummed with life. Merchants trading along dusty streets, scribes pressing symbols into wet clay, and priests rising at dawn to greet the gods from the high steps of their temple towers. In these cities, bronze tools carved wooden beams more precisely, shaped the bricks that formed towering ziggurats, and strengthened the blades used in harvest and ritual alike. To the west, another great river valley prepared to enter its own Bronze Age world. Egypt, with its long, narrow spine of Nile water, blossomed into a kingdom bounded by deserts on both sides. As the Nile rose each year, soaking the soil with rich silt, communities grew in steady rhythm near its banks. The appearance of bronze tools helped frame early Egyptian society, refining the architecture of tombs and temples and contributing to the slow consolidation of villages into a unified land ruled by a single king. Over the next centuries, bronze chisels and adzes shaped monumental stone, carving the earliest ceremonial enclosures and forming the first stirrings of the architectural heritage for which Egypt later became known. Farther east, in the valley of the Indus River, another civilization matured quietly. Although less known than Mesopotamia or Egypt, the Indus Valley cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro thrived with remarkable sophistication. Broad streets laid in careful grids, houses equipped with early forms of drainage, wells dug deep into the earth, and artisans crafting beads, pottery, and intricate seals. While bronze was not as dominant here as in other regions, its presence nonetheless contributed to the tools used in construction, agriculture, and craftwork. The people of the Indus left behind no readable writing, but their cities tell a story of peaceful organization, steady trade, and an appreciation for order and hygiene. To the north and west, ancient China entered its own early Bronze Age during this vast period. Communities along the Yellow River gradually learned the secrets of bronze working, and as centuries passed, their craftsmanship became so refined that the bronze vessels of the Shang dynasty would later be considered among the finest metalworks of the ancient world. But in the earliest centuries, it all began with quiet experimentation, a handful of artisans learning the temperatures of fire, the properties of ore, and the patience required to cast molten metal into shapes of use and beauty. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean world, subtle changes began to take place along the islands and coasts of Crete, Cyprus, and mainland Greece. Communities that once lived in scattered small villages developed growing networks of trade and communication. The Aegean Sea became a pathway connecting distant places, with ships carrying obsidian, saffron, pottery, and metal across the waves. Over centuries, these networks would give rise to the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, cultures marked by elegant palaces, storied myths, and far-reaching influence. But in this early dawn of the Bronze Age, the foundations were still forming, shaped by maritime exchange and early craftsmanship. As bronze slowly permeated these different regions, it brought with it subtle but profound changes in society. Tools became sharper and more durable, allowing fields to be plowed more efficiently and timber to be cut with greater precision. This in turn supported growing populations and encouraged the development of larger settlements. In these settlements, specialization grew. Farmers tended fields. Builders raised houses and walls. Scribes recorded trade agreements and ritual offerings. Merchants carried goods along routes that extended farther with each passing generation. Metal itself became a symbol of connection. Copper traveled along trade routes from mountain ranges in Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Cyprus. Tin, rarer and more mysterious, traveled from distant lands whose exact locations remain partly unknown, even today. These metals converged in workshops near great rivers, in highland fortresses, and in coastal towns, where artisans melted them in clay crucibles and poured them into molds. Bronze tools and weapons thus bore visible traces of this interconnected world, their gleaming surfaces shaped by resources from many places. At the same time, the rise of the Bronze Age deepened humanity's relationship with the sacred. Across all these regions, temples grew larger and rituals more elaborate. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats, stepped towers of brick, rose like artificial mountains above the plains, serving as symbolic bridges between earth and the realm of the gods. Priests tended shrines dedicated to Anu, Enlil, and Inanna, believing that the gods walked invisibly among their people, guiding the winds and the floods. In Egypt, temples aligned with the rising sun reflected a worldview in which time and eternity intertwined. The appearance of bronze strengthened tools used in temple construction, allowing artisans to carve more detailed hieroglyphs and sculpt more refined forms. Each act of carving, each offering placed upon an altar, contributed to the cosmic harmony Egyptians believed they maintained between the world of the living and the world of the divine. Across the Aegean Sea, the earliest palatial centers in Crete displayed frescoes and artifacts that suggested complex religious symbolism, bulls, goddesses, and rituals whose precise meanings remain mysterious. Bronze tools and weapons played a role in ceremonial life as much as in practical labor. To these early Minoan communities, bronze was not merely useful. It was precious, shimmering in firelight as though touched by divine presence. In Anatolia, emerging Hittite communities blended local beliefs with influences from older Mesopotamian traditions. Their rituals, inscribed later on clay tablets, described offerings to storm gods, sun goddesses, and ancestral spirits, all connected to a cosmic order in which the king played a central role. Even far to the east, in early Chinese society, bronze vessels held religious significance. They were cast not simply for function, but for ritual. Their shapes reflected deep cosmological ideas. Their surfaces bore designs that spoke of ancestors, spirits, and the unseen forces governing the world. These vessels were placed in tombs, used in ceremonies, and treasured by elite families, linking the living to the honored dead. In this early Bronze Age world, the boundaries between the sacred and the everyday were thin. A farmer using a bronze sickle to cut wheat worked under the blessing of gods, who ensured the floodwaters arrived each year. A merchant carrying bronze daggers across desert trails moved through lands shaped by ancient myths. A scribe recording inventories in a temple storeroom believed that the symbols he pressed into clay connected earthly order to divine will. This connection between practical life and spiritual belief gave the Bronze Age its distinctive tone, a blending of material progress with a cosmic worldview in which the gods guided the rise of cities and watched over the rhythms of nature. As bronze tools and weapons shaped human lives, myths and rituals shaped human understanding. Over centuries, as this era unfolded, cities grew more complex. Walls rose around them for protection. Palaces expanded into labyrinthine structures. Administration became more sophisticated. Writing developed in several regions to track offerings, laws, and trade. The earliest stories of gods and heroes began to take shape, recorded on clay tablets or passed along in oral tradition. These stories preserved the worldview of the age, its sense of wonder, its respect for order, and its reverence for powers greater than any human. The Bronze Age was therefore not only an era of metal, it was an era of beginnings. Beginnings of government, of architecture, of written language, and of mythologies that would later echo through classical antiquity. It was the period when humanity first built structures intended to last, raised cities meant to endure, and conceived of time in ways that extended beyond generations. And still, all of this happened gradually. The dawn of the Bronze Age was not marked by sudden invention or dramatic change, but by centuries of slow refinement. Fire was stoked in countless small workshops. Hammers struck anvils in rhythmic cadence. Farmers harvested their fields season after season. Priests offered morning prayers as the sun rose in quiet splendor. And across continents, the foundations of civilization settled like soft earth beneath new-built walls. The world was preparing for its first great age of cities and kingdoms, an age that would span more than a millennium, shaping cultures whose influence would never fully vanish. As the Bronze Age deepened, these early civilizations began to reach outward. Their ships ventured farther, their connections strengthened, their stories grew richer. And from these developments emerged the true character of this remarkable age. A world of trade, diplomacy, arts, and kings, all woven into the slow, ancient rhythm of human endeavor. This gentle unfolding marks the beginning of our journey through the Bronze Age. A vast, interconnected world rising quietly beneath the early light of history. As the Bronze Age settled more firmly across the ancient world, the scattered villages and riverbank settlements of earlier centuries gradually transformed into the first enduring cities. These cities did not rise suddenly or through dramatic change. Instead, they grew like slow-blooming flowers along rivers, coastlines, and fertile plains. With each passing generation, structures became larger, streets became more defined, and societies developed the rhythms that would shape the world for more than 1,000 years. In these early cities, one finds the first outlines of law, story, governance, and trade. They formed the beating heart of the Bronze Age, each contributing to a network of human activity that reached farther than ever before. In Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, the early cities continued their quiet expansion. Uruk, already ancient by this time, developed into a sprawling urban center with broad temples and administrative halls. Its famous Ayana district, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, grew layer upon layer over the centuries, forming an archaeological record of continuous ritual life. Priests dedicated offerings, scribes recorded inventories, and merchants traveled to distant lands carrying goods marked with clay seal impressions. The city's walls, later described by poets, represented not only defense, but identity. An acknowledgement that the people of Uruk belonged to something larger than family or tribe. Nearby, the city of Ur thrived with similar energy. It lay closer to the marshlands near the Persian Gulf, where reeds and waterways blended into a mosaic of life. The people of Ur built towering ziggurats, their stairways rising toward the sky in quiet imitation of mountains. These structures served as the focal points of their spiritual lives. Workers who shaped mud bricks under the heat of the Mesopotamian sun contributed to buildings they believed linked earth to heaven, humans to gods. Bronze chisels and blades strengthened this architectural culture, allowing builders to carve more precisely and artisans to create more intricate works. Along the edges of these cities, smaller towns formed a constellation of communities. Some specialized in pottery, others in weaving, others in agriculture. Together, they created a web of interdependent settlements tied by trade and shared ritual. This interdependence formed the foundation of city-states, a political pattern that would shape Mesopotamia for much of its early history. Each city had a patron deity, a ruler who governed in concert with priests, and a system of canals that brought river water to distant fields. As Mesopotamia matured, Egypt entered its own flowering of Bronze Age power. The Nile, moving in its timeless rhythm from the highlands of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, served as the lifeline of the Egyptian world. Along its narrow banks, communities prospered during the annual flood, using bronze tools to carve channels, shape wood, and construct the earliest monumental structures. In this period, the land gradually moved toward unification under a single crown. When the first dynasty emerged, the pharaoh became the center of political and cosmic order. Behind him stood a growing administration of officials and scribes who recorded offerings, judged disputes, and managed temple estates. The bronze tools of Egypt did not shape weapons alone. They shaped belief. Artisans used them to carve hieroglyphs across tomb walls, describing journeys to the afterlife. They shaped statues of deities, falcon-headed gods, jackal protectors, and sun disk emblems, symbols of a world governed by cycles of life, death, and rebirth. They carved stone vessels placed in tombs so that the dead might carry sustenance into eternity. Thus, bronze quietly blended with Egypt's immense spiritual architecture, reinforcing the idea that every tool and every act could be part of a cosmic balance. In the centuries that followed, Egypt's first great monumental works arose. The earliest mastabas, a kind of flat-roofed tomb, became stepping stones toward the monumental pyramids that would later define the Old Kingdom. Though these later achievements would require different materials and even greater innovation, their earliest foundations were laid during the Bronze Age era. And through this period, Egypt established the cultural patterns that would sustain it for millennia. Farther east, the Indus Valley civilization continued to grow, though the nature of its political organization remains one of the great quiet mysteries of ancient history. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, where kings and rulers left records of their power, the Indus Valley left no deciphered writing and no monumental inscriptions. Its cities were organized not by towering palaces, but by balanced, careful planning. Streets ran straight and broad, houses aligned around central courtyards, wells dotted neighborhoods. Each residence, large or small, often included drains connected to main channels that carried wastewater away from the city. This attention to hygiene and civic order revealed a sophisticated understanding of urban life. Bronze tools played a role in this organization. They shaped bricks fired in kilns, assisted in cutting timber for building, and contributed to the manufacture of seals used for trade. The people of the Indus crafted beautiful bronze objects, including figurines, ornaments, and tools. Their workshops echoed with the steady rhythm of casting and shaping, a quiet soundtrack to a civilization whose internal workings still lie partly concealed beneath the sands of time. Moving north into the Caucasus and the Anatolian Plateau, the Bronze Age also fostered the rise of powerful trading communities. The people of Anatolia developed early kingdoms that would later form the core of Hittite civilization. These early groups built fortified towns on hilltops, overlooking valleys rich with timber, ore, and pastures. Bronze tools helped shape their defenses, their agricultural tools, and their weapons. Over time, the Hittites emerged as a force capable of producing written laws and engaging in international diplomacy, most famously with Egypt during the late Bronze Age. But in this earlier period, they were still gathering strength, refining their skills, and learning from the exchange of goods with distant neighbors. The island of Cyprus, known for its copper mines, became a significant contributor to the Bronze Age economy. Ships from many lands visited its shores, carrying goods to exchange for the valuable metal that lay within its mountains. Cyprus thus became a nexus point for trade, connecting the Aegean, Anatolia, and the Levant. This trade strengthened not only economic networks, but cultural exchange as well. Ideas, rituals, and artistic styles traveled wherever merchants carried metal and crafted goods. The Aegean Sea itself became one of the era's great highways. Its scattered islands formed stepping stones between mainland Greece, Crete, and the coast of Turkey. Maritime communities grew adept at navigating these waters, building ships sturdy enough to cross the sea and swift enough to carry goods efficiently. Over generations, this region's quiet trade routes would contribute to the rise of the Minoan civilization, an early Bronze Age culture known for its palaces, frescoes, and maritime influence. In Crete, the first large architectural complexes began to take shape during this time. Structures with long corridors, storerooms, workshops, and central courtyards. These early palatial centers did not appear all at once. They expanded gradually, generation by generation, shaped by administrative needs, craft production, and the cultural preference for open courtyards where gatherings and rituals could take place. Bronze tools played a crucial role in refining these architectural developments, allowing builders to shape stone with greater precision and artisans to create complex metalwork, pottery, and frescoes. The Minoans' artistic style hinted at a worldview flowing with life. Swirling patterns, marine imagery, and depictions of ritual movement suggested a culture attuned to the sea and its rhythms. While their written script, Linear A, remains undeciphered, the artifacts they left behind speak clearly of a society that valued beauty, ceremony, and interconnectedness. Bronze daggers, jewelry, and ceremonial objects found in palaces and tombs reflect both technical skill and symbolic meaning. Across the sea on mainland Greece, small Mycenaean communities began to form the earliest shapes of what would become a powerful Bronze Age civilization. These early settlements, though modest, displayed signs of increasing complexity. Fortified walls, warrior graves, and imported goods suggested growing interaction with neighboring lands. Bronze swords, spearheads, and tools shaped the practical life of these early Mycenaeans, whose warrior culture would flourish in the centuries to come. As the Bronze Age matured across so many lands, connections between these regions strengthened. Trade routes stretched from Egypt to Mesopotamia, from Anatolia to the Aegean, from the Indus Valley to the Persian Gulf. Along deserts, rivers, and coastlines, caravans and ships transported metals, grain, incense, fabrics, and crafted goods. Diplomatic letters, written later in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the Near East, carried gifts and greetings between kings. Though these documents belong to a slightly later period, the foundations of such exchanges were laid in the early Bronze Age. Through all these developments, life remained steady. Farmers sowed grain in floodplains enriched by rivers. Shepherds tended flocks along hillsides dotted with early fortresses. Builders raised walls that grew thicker and stronger with each generation. Priests tended to rituals passed down from ancestors, believing that adherence to tradition maintained the cosmic order. In every region, bronze tools quietly participated in this unfolding, shaping lives and cultures with a kind of understated persistence. The Bronze Age thus grew not through sudden transformation, but through countless small acts. A blacksmith forging a new blade, a merchant measuring grain, a scribe pressing signs into a clay tablet. Over time, these acts formed the foundation of great civilizations, setting precedents in governance, architecture, religion, and trade that would endure long after the Bronze Age itself had faded. By the middle of this long era, the ancient world was on the threshold of its first interconnected age. Cities had become centers of administration and belief. Kingdoms had begun to form the earliest diplomatic networks. Writing, trade, and ritual linked distant lands. The quiet dawn of the Bronze Age had given way to a rising light, a light that illuminated the world's first great powers and prepared the way for even greater cultural achievements to come. As the Bronze Age progressed and early cities began to stabilize their foundations, a new phase of ancient history emerged. The scattered urban centers of earlier centuries grew into organized kingdoms and regional powers. These kingdoms did not arise through sudden conquest or dramatic upheaval, but through slow consolidation, careful administration, and the steady accumulation of knowledge. Across the lands of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, the Aegean, and beyond, political structures matured alongside religious institutions and economic networks. The world became more connected, more stable, and more aware of itself as a collection of interacting cultures. In this new landscape, ideas, goods, and traditions flowed more freely than ever before. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian city-states, once fiercely independent, began to form larger alliances and rivalries. Cities like Ur, Lagash, and Umma engaged not only in trade and worship, but also in early forms of diplomacy. The rulers of these city-states, often called Ensi or Lugal, maintained complex relationships with one another, negotiated land boundaries, and coordinated canal systems that sustained agriculture. As bronze tools improved irrigation and construction, these city-states produced enough surplus to support large bureaucracies filled with scribes, administrators, and temple personnel. In this region, the first great kingdoms began to take shape. In the late 3rd millennium BCE, the Akkadian Empire emerged under the leadership of Sargon of Akkad, though this lies just beyond the earlier phase of the Bronze Age. Still, the foundations for such an empire were laid during the earlier centuries. Improved infrastructure, organized labor, and increasing intercity communication. The Bronze Age did not merely provide tools for craftsmen, but set the stage for the administrative, political, and spiritual innovations that made greater centralization possible. At the heart of this world stood the temples, which functioned as both religious and economic centers. Temple precincts stored grain, managed herds, oversaw land distribution, and maintained workshops where bronze goods were produced. Priests and priestesses carried out daily rituals believed essential for the well-being of the city. They mediated the relationship between people and gods, between the unpredictable forces of nature and the order required for society to thrive. Through these sacred duties, temples preserved a sense of balance and continuity. While Mesopotamia grew in complexity, Egypt entered a period of increasing unity and power. The early dynasties slowly refined administrative structures, establishing offices for tax collection, irrigation management, and temple oversight. Bronze tools supported the expansion of agriculture, allowing farmers to cultivate greater areas of land with improved efficiency. The river's annual flood remained central to life, but now its waters supported more sophisticated networks of fields and canals. In this landscape, the Old Kingdom began to take shape, a period known for the construction of the pyramids. These monumental structures were not the sudden achievements of a single generation, but the culmination of centuries of architectural and engineering development. Bronze chisels shaped limestone blocks. Bronze tools helped prepare wooden sledges and rollers. Workers, organized into rotating crews, transported materials across great distances. While the pyramids themselves were composed primarily of stone, the society that built them was deeply supported by the tools, skills, and organization of the Bronze Age. During this time, the pharaoh became more than a political leader. He was seen as a divine figure, the earthly embodiment of the gods who maintained cosmic order. Temples expanded their roles, and scribes recorded offerings, festivals, and events in careful detail. Egyptian religion and political authority became intertwined in a way that would shape the next 2,000 years of history. Bronze, though not always visible in the grand monuments of Egypt, was quietly present in the hands of the craftsmen, farmers, and officials who sustained the kingdom. Beyond Egypt and Mesopotamia, the lands of Anatolia were undergoing their own transformations. The early communities that had emerged near the mountains and valleys of central Anatolia grew into more organized societies. Bronze tools strengthened agriculture and craft production, while fortified settlements began to appear more frequently across the landscape. In these places, future Hittite society found its earliest roots. The people of Anatolia interacted with their neighbors through trade and migration, absorbing ideas from Mesopotamia while maintaining their own distinct languages and traditions. The presence of metalworkers contributed significantly to Anatolia's growing power. Copper and tin flowed through the region, and the knowledge of alloying these metals into bronze became increasingly refined. Over time, this metallurgical expertise helped Anatolia become one of the significant participants in the Great Bronze Age networks, providing raw materials and crafted goods to many cultures. Across the Mediterranean, the island of Crete continued to develop its distinctive civilization. The early palatial centers, which first appeared during the middle of the Bronze Age, expanded into more complex structures. These palaces were not simple residences, but centers of administration, religion, and craft production. Their architecture featured long corridors, storerooms filled with large jars, external staircases, and central courtyards where ceremonies took place. Bronze tools shaped wooden beams and carved decorative elements found in these palaces, reflecting the growing skill of Minoan artisans. In these Cretan palaces, frescoes adorned the walls with scenes from daily life and ritual. Images of marine life, octopuses, fish, dolphins, revealed the deep connection between the Minoans and the sea. Bulls appeared frequently in their art, hinting at ceremonial practices that carried symbolic significance. Though the details of Minoan religion remain elusive, the vibrancy of their artistic expression suggested a society attuned to movement, rhythm, and harmony. Crete's influence expanded beyond the island. Its ships traveled across the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, carrying pottery, metal goods, and textiles. Minoan artifacts appeared in distant lands, showing that the island's culture reached far outside its shores. This maritime network allowed Crete to engage with Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece, making it one of the most interconnected cultures of the Bronze Age. On the mainland, early Mycenaean communities continued their rise. Fortified settlements grew into citadels, positioned strategically on hilltops with commanding views of surrounding plains. These sites, including Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, began to develop the architectural features that would later define their civilization. Cyclopean walls, built of massive stone blocks, created strong defensive enclosures. Within these walls, palaces took form, designed to house rulers, administrators, and storerooms. Bronze weapons, swords, spearheads, and daggers reflected the martial character that would become a hallmark of the Mycenaean world. The Mycenaeans also engaged in extensive trade. Their pottery traveled to Cyprus, Egypt, the Levant, and beyond. They imported raw materials, including metals, ivory, and luxury goods. They learned from the Minoans, adopting aspects of their writing system and artistic style. Yet they retained their own identity, shaped by a warrior elite who valued strength, lineage, and control over territory. In these early centuries, the seeds of the later Mycenaean palatial culture were planted, supported by bronze tools and weapons that strengthened both craft and military capability. As these great centers emerged, long-distance trade networks solidified their influence. Caravans and ships carried bronze goods, textiles, grain, and precious objects across continents. The ancient Near East became interconnected in a way that allowed ideas to spread with remarkable speed. Innovations in writing, for example, the development of cuneiform and hieroglyphic systems, enabled communication across political boundaries. Through letters etched into clay, kings exchanged gifts, arranged marriages, and sought alliances. The Bronze Age world, though ancient, possessed a complexity that mirrored later eras. Diplomacy was subtle, ritualized, and essential. Rulers sent envoys to distant lands, offering fine textiles, carved objects, and raw materials in exchange for peace or trade agreements. In this environment, the movement of bronze, whether as tools, weapons, or ceremonial goods, formed a steady current through which these relationships flowed. Beyond political and economic developments, the rise of Bronze Age kingdoms also carried spiritual significance. In Mesopotamia, temples grew larger and more elaborate, reflecting the city's achievements. Ziggurats, with their layered terraces, symbolized mountains rising from the plains, connecting the earth below to the heavens above. In Egypt, temples aligned with celestial events and mirrored the cycles of the sun. Priests studied the movements of stars, believing that the heavens contained signs of divine intention. Their rituals, shaped by bronze tools and sacred objects, reinforced the cosmic order that sustained the kingdom. In Crete, religious practice blended natural imagery with ceremonial action. Shrines contained bronze figurines, stone libation tables, and clay objects used in ritual. The natural world, mountains, caves, and the sea, held spiritual meaning. As the Minoan civilization grew, its religious ideology influenced neighboring regions, spreading symbols still recognized today in archaeological remains. Meanwhile, in early China, the development of bronze vessel casting ushered in a profound cultural transformation. These vessels were used not merely for storage or dining, but for rituals honoring ancestors. Their intricate designs, Tayoti masks, dragons, and geometric motifs, reflected deep spiritual and cosmological beliefs. Families maintained ancestral altars, using bronze vessels in ceremonies that linked the living to the departed. Over centuries, this ritual culture strengthened familial bonds and contributed to the shaping of early Chinese social structure. In this great constellation of Bronze Age cultures, each region contributed to an emerging global landscape defined by exchange, innovation, and symbolism. Though separated by mountains, deserts, and seas, these cultures shared a common trait: the belief that human life was part of a larger cosmic order. Kings governed as stewards of divine principles. Priests performed rituals to maintain balance. Artisans shaped objects that carried spiritual meaning as well as practical value. This shared worldview helped maintain stability across centuries. While conflicts arose, they did not destroy the fundamental structures of early civilizations. Instead, these societies endured, adapted, and deepened their traditions. Bronze remained central to this world, not merely as metal, but as a symbol of connection, skill, and continuity. By the height of the Bronze Age's middle period, the ancient world had formed a rich, interconnected mosaic. From the palaces of Crete to the floodplains of Egypt, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the fortresses of Anatolia, and from the planned cities of the Indus to the ritual workshops of early China, civilizations had reached a new level of organization and awareness. This was the age when human societies learned how to govern themselves, how to create monumental architecture, how to communicate across distances, and how to see their world as something shaped not only by human hands, but by divine order. The rise of kingdoms was therefore not only a political development, but a cultural awakening. An awakening that would prepare the ancient world for the grandeur, diversity, and complexity that characterized the later centuries of the Bronze Age. As the Bronze Age matured, the ancient world entered one of the first great periods of interconnectedness. Across deserts, river valleys, mountain passes, and open seas, routes of trade and communication quietly formed a network that linked distant civilizations. This network was not governed by any single empire or ruler. It evolved naturally, shaped by the movement of metals, grains, textiles, and ideas. Carried by merchants, sailors, scribes, and diplomats who traversed long distances in steady rhythm. Through this web, cultures influenced one another. Rituals spread, artistic styles blended, and kingdoms learned to speak to each other through gifts, envoys, and carefully worded letters. In this vast landscape, bronze itself became both a commodity and a symbol of connection. The alloy's two essential components, copper and tin, rarely appeared together in the same geological region. Their separation created an early need for long-distance exchange. Copper traveled from mines in Cyprus, the Sinai Peninsula, Anatolia, and the Caucasus. Tin was even more elusive, sourced from places such as Afghanistan, Iran, and possibly regions farther west. The paths these metals followed formed the arteries of Bronze Age trade. On the island of Cyprus, copper extraction became a defining feature of local life. The mountains of the island contained vast deposits of malachite and other copper ores. For generations, miners descended into shafts carved into the earth, extracting the metal piece by piece. Smelting workshops, located near the mines or along the coast, released plumes of smoke into the air as workers melted the ore in clay furnaces. In these fiery workshops, copper took on a new life, forming ingots that merchants loaded onto ships bound for harbors across the Mediterranean. These copper ingots, often cast in distinctive shapes resembling ox hides, traveled widely. Archaeologists have discovered them in shipwrecks and storerooms from Turkey to Crete, from Egypt to the Levant. Their presence in such varied locations reveals the extent of maritime trade during the Bronze Age. Ships crossed the Mediterranean in repeating patterns, following coastlines by day and stars by night. The sea was not a barrier, but a pathway, a gently moving highway connecting distant lands. In the Aegean Sea, Minoan merchants sailed elegant ships with high prows carved in decorative shapes. These vessels carried pottery adorned with swirling patterns, fine textiles, wooden goods, and crafted metal items. The Minoans traded extensively with Egypt, sending goods that appeared in Egyptian tombs as treasured imports. In return, they received grain, papyrus, faience, and other products unavailable on their island. The maritime world of the Minoans was vibrant, peaceful, and steady, supported by the calm harbors and coastal towns that dotted Crete's shoreline. Trade passed along land routes as well. Caravans moved slowly across the deserts of the Near East, connecting Mesopotamia with the Levant, Anatolia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Donkeys carried goods along dusty roads under the guidance of merchants who understood both the terrain and the customs of the many communities they encountered. These caravans brought timber, grain, stone, and textiles to cities that needed them. They also carried rarer goods, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Nubia, and spices from unknown lands. Each exchange added another thread to the growing tapestry of Bronze Age interaction. As trade intensified, so did diplomacy. The ancient Near East became a world of correspondence, a subtle and formal system of communication that later produced some of the most insightful records of the age. Although the most famous diplomatic letters date from the late Bronze Age and come from the archives of Amarna, the foundations of such diplomacy were laid centuries earlier, as cities and kingdoms learned to interact with respect, ritual, and shared expectations. Diplomacy in the Bronze Age often took the form of gift exchange. Kings sent one another objects of value: gold vessels, fine textiles, chariots, horses, and symbolic items, to affirm alliances or celebrate major events. These gifts were not mere luxuries. They represented relationships built upon mutual recognition and trust. A gift received required a gift returned, creating a circuit of respect that reinforced diplomatic bonds. From the Levant to Mesopotamia, scribes prepared these exchanges with precise language. Their cuneiform tablets recorded accounts of caravans, lists of gifts, and the names of envoys who traveled between courts. These envoys carried not only objects, but messages, treaties, and requests. They represented the will of their rulers, acting as intermediaries in a world where personal relationships, honor, and ritual propriety held great importance. In this diplomatic landscape, Egypt played a central role. Its wealth, stability, and monumental culture made it one of the most respected powers of the Bronze Age. Kings of distant lands, whether in Anatolia, Mesopotamia, or the Levant, sought alliances with Egypt through diplomacy, trade, and sometimes marriage. The Egyptian court maintained strict ceremonial protocols for receiving foreign envoys. These visitors passed through halls adorned with colorful reliefs depicting scenes of ritual, life along the Nile, and processions honoring the gods. Bronze tools, though not visible in ceremonial displays, shaped the stone and wood that formed the architecture of these grand spaces. Meanwhile, the Hittites slowly emerged as a formidable power in central Anatolia. Their capital, Hattusa, grew in strength during the Middle and Late Bronze Age. Here, scribes carved and pressed records in cuneiform, documenting laws, peace treaties, trade agreements, and myths. Hittite diplomacy became one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world, relying on skilled envoys and carefully executed rituals. Like other kingdoms, the Hittites valued bronze tools and weapons, but they also prized horses and chariots, symbols of military and diplomatic prestige. Across the Eastern Mediterranean, the cities of the Levant formed another vital link in the Bronze Age network. Towns such as Byblos, Ugarit, and Tyre connected Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia through trade. Their harbors welcomed ships from many lands. Their warehouses stocked goods from across the region. Their scribes recorded commercial exchanges and diplomatic messages. These coastal cities served as gateways, facilitating the movement of goods, ideas, and cultural practices. Their craftsmen played crucial roles in shaping the artistic and commercial life of the era. Ugarit, in particular, became known for its cosmopolitan culture. Located on the Syrian coast, it produced literature, engaged in far-reaching trade, and maintained diplomatic ties with Egypt, Cyprus, and the Hittite Empire. Its archives included texts in multiple languages and scripts, reflecting the cultural blending that defined the Bronze Age. Here, bronze goods, tools, and weapons mingled with imported pottery, artistic figurines, and luxury items from distant lands. In addition to trade and diplomacy, the Bronze Age saw the quiet expansion of literacy. Although writing remained the domain of scribes and elites, the spread of scripts such as cuneiform, hieroglyphic, and linear A revealed the growing need for record-keeping. Writing helped administer cities, track taxation, certify transactions, and maintain religious traditions. In many cases, writing itself became an instrument of diplomacy. Letters traveled between kings who never met in person. Their thoughts conveyed across hundreds of miles through symbols pressed into clay. While long-distance trade and diplomacy strengthened cultural ties, each region also cultivated distinctive artistic styles shaped by local traditions. In Egypt, painters decorated tomb walls with scenes of daily life, agriculture, and the journey to the afterlife. Their pigments, earthy reds, yellows, blues, and greens, captured the rhythms of the Nile Valley. In Mesopotamia, artisans carved intricate cylinder seals that acted as signatures for merchants and officials. The images on these seals, mythic creatures, deities, and ceremonial scenes, reflected the beliefs of the region. The Minoans painted frescoes filled with movement and color, depicting lively scenes of nature, ritual dances, and marine life. Their pottery featured swirling motifs inspired by waves and currents, blending artistic imagination with maritime identity. The Mycenaeans, influenced by Minoan art, yet shaped by their own warrior ethos, created pottery with simpler, more geometric patterns and carved ornate bronze weapons that reflected their martial culture. As artistic styles evolved, metallurgy continued to influence craft and identity across the Bronze Age world. Bronze tools shaped wooden furniture, carved stone vessels, and allowed artisans to work with new materials. Bronze weapons symbolized status and power. A well-crafted sword or dagger served not only as a tool of war, but as a symbol of leadership, placed in tombs and worn during ceremonies. Beyond the practical and artistic, bronze also carried spiritual significance. Many cultures cast bronze objects for ritual use, vessels for offerings, figurines of deities, ceremonial blades, and other sacred items. The transformation of ore into glowing metal, shaped by fire and skill, seemed to echo the mysteries of creation itself. In early China, the casting of bronze ritual vessels became central to ancestral worship. In the Near East, bronze figurines played roles in temple offerings. Across the Aegean, ceremonial blades reflected ritual actions whose meanings now lie in fragments, but whose importance was clear in their craftsmanship. In this intricate world, trade was not merely commercial, it was cultural. When a Minoan pot arrived in Egypt, or an Egyptian bead found its way to Mycenae, these objects carried with them pieces of foreign identity. They became symbols of exchange that touched the lives of those who used, displayed, or buried them. Through such objects, the ancient world came to know itself as a connected landscape. This connectivity shaped religious ideas as well. Gods traveled across borders through stories and symbols. The storm gods of Anatolia and Mesopotamia shared features. Goddesses associated with fertility, mountains, or the moon appeared in similar forms across regions. The imagery of lions, bulls, serpents, and birds carried symbolic weight from one culture to another, blending beliefs across centuries of interaction. Despite this interconnected world, each civilization maintained its own rhythms. Each preserved traditions rooted in local geography, river floods, mountain passes, or desert winds. Trade, diplomacy, and ideas flowed around these boundaries, but they never erased the distinct identities of the lands they touched. This balance between connection and individuality gave the Bronze Age its unique character, a world unified by exchange, yet diverse in expression. By the height of this era, the Bronze Age had become a tapestry of cultures linked by shared materials and technologies. Across this tapestry, caravans traveled quietly beneath the sun. Ships sailed steadily across calm seas. Scribes shaped symbols into clay. Artisans worked in the glow of furnaces. Priests performed rituals with tools fashioned from bronze. Kings received envoys bearing gifts and messages from distant lands. Through these gentle rhythms, the ancient world expanded. Not militarily, but culturally, economically, and spiritually. The Bronze Age reached its full strength in these centuries, forming the foundation for the great political and cultural achievements that would follow. This era of connection prepared the world for the height of imperial power, monumental construction, and enduring mythologies that would arise in the later Bronze Age and beyond. In this quiet, interconnected world, humanity took some of its earliest steps toward global awareness. The Bronze Age became not just a period defined by metal, but a period defined by connection. The first time in history when so many cultures, separated by great distances, became part of a shared human story. By the middle centuries of the Bronze Age, the ancient world entered a period of remarkable refinement. An era in which many of the earliest kingdoms reached their peak forms of cultural, political, and spiritual expression. The foundations laid by earlier generations grew into complex systems of governance, artistry, and ritual. Cities expanded, palaces reached new heights of sophistication, and written laws emerged to guide daily life. Trade flowed smoothly along routes established over centuries, and diplomacy matured into a subtle language shared among kings. This Middle Bronze Age, though separated across regions, carried a unified sense of stability. Civilizations were no longer in their experimental phases. Their social structures were well established, their religious systems deeply rooted, and their economies refined through generations of craft and exchange. It was a quiet golden era, one defined not by conquest, but by consolidation, culture, and continuity. In Egypt, this period aligned with what historians call the Middle Kingdom, a time often remembered as one of balance and harmony. After centuries of regional division, Egypt had reunified under strong rulers who restored order across the land. Their governance was calm and deliberate, reflecting a belief that kingship served as the anchor of cosmic balance. These monarchs undertook projects that revitalized temples, expanded agriculture, and strengthened administrative centers. The Middle Kingdom's architecture reflected this steady worldview. Temples grew more refined, their walls inscribed with texts describing the king's responsibilities, the roles of the gods, and the rituals that maintained universal harmony. Bronze tools played an essential role in shaping these structures, carving hieroglyphs into limestone and assisting artisans in the creation of wooden furniture, ritual equipment, and statues. In literature, the Middle Kingdom produced works that echoed a deeper introspection than earlier eras. Stories such as The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor and The Story of Sinuhe blended myth, morality, and human experience. These tales revealed a world in which the Egyptians increasingly looked inward, contemplating themes of fate, identity, and the guidance of the divine. Though composed on papyrus and shaped by scribal hands, these stories reflected a culture confident in its place within the cosmic order. Beyond the Nile Valley, Mesopotamia experienced its own form of golden stability. City-states had long learned to manage their internal affairs through a complex blend of tradition, law, and ritual. As the centuries progressed, larger kingdoms emerged, each seeking to unify different regions under their influence. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, the great city of Babylon began to grow in importance under a series of rulers who recognized the power of law as both political tool and cultural foundation. Among these rulers, Hammurabi is remembered most clearly. His reign, though part of the broader Middle Bronze Age, marked a turning point in the relationship between governance and written law. Hammurabi's famous law code did not appear suddenly. It grew from centuries of earlier legal traditions kept by scribes, priests, and city administrators. But Hammurabi's code was exceptional in its length, detail, and symbolic purpose. Inscribed on a tall stone stele, it served as a visible reminder of the king's commitment to justice and order. This code provided guidance on matters ranging from property disputes to marriage contracts, labor responsibilities to religious obligations. It reflected a society deeply concerned with balance, fairness, and harmony, qualities that resonated across Bronze Age cultures. Though the specifics varied from region to region, the broader principle remained. Law served as a foundation for stability, ensuring that cities functioned smoothly and that relationships among people remained clear and regulated. Across Mesopotamia, other kingdoms engaged in similar acts of consolidation. The city-states of the south, influenced by Sumerian tradition, preserved their temple-based economic systems, while northern regions developed distinct political structures. The Assyrian city of Assur grew steadily, laying early foundations for a kingdom that would later become formidable. In these centuries, the Middle Bronze Age world of Mesopotamia felt tightly woven, a place where scribes moved between cities. Merchants traveled along river routes, and temples served as anchors for shared cultural identity. In the Levant, a constellation of smaller city kingdoms thrived along the coast and in inland valleys. These towns operated as nodes within the wider Bronze Age network, facilitating trade between Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia. Their economies revolved around agriculture, timber, metalwork, and maritime exchange. In these regions, palaces and administrative centers coordinated local production and international trade, reflecting the interconnected nature of the Middle Bronze Age. Some of the Levant's most significant developments occurred in cities such as Byblos, whose connections with Egypt dated back to the early Bronze Age. Byblos acted as a vital port for timber shipped south along the Mediterranean coast, supplying Egypt with cedar used in shipbuilding and temple construction. The quiet rhythm of this trade spanned many centuries, forming one of the most enduring partnerships of the ancient world. As merchants and envoys traveled between these lands, they carried not only goods, but cultural symbols, artistic motifs, and religious ideas. Further north, in Anatolia, the emerging Hittite kingdom continued to consolidate. The Middle Bronze Age saw the development of fortified sites with well-planned defenses, granaries, and administrative centers. Bronze weapons, swords, axes, and spearheads played a key role in the Hittites' expansion. But diplomacy and law were equally important. Kings issued edicts that structured the responsibilities of nobles and officials. Rituals honored the gods of storm, sun, and hearth. The Hittites also preserved myths describing cosmic battles and divine councils, incorporating traditions from both Indo-European and Mesopotamian sources. In these Anatolian lands, metallurgy continued to flourish. Bronze working workshops produced tools and weapons of increasing sophistication. The knowledge of casting and alloying passed through generations of artisans who worked near the kilns and foundries of royal centers. Their craft supported the kingdom's economy and military, forming a quiet but essential pillar of Hittite society. Across the sea, the island of Crete reached one of its cultural peaks during the Middle Bronze Age. The Minoan palaces expanded significantly, becoming centers of administration, storage, artistry, and ceremony. The palace at Knossos, for example, developed into a labyrinthine complex with hundreds of rooms, storerooms stocked with large clay jars, hallways decorated with frescoes, and workshops buzzing with activity. Every part of these centers contributed to the island's economic, spiritual, and political life. In the Minoan world, artistry reached heights rarely seen in earlier eras. Frescoes adorned palace walls with scenes of nature, dance, and ritual. Their colors, deep blues, warm reds, bright whites, captured movement with a sense of fluidity uncommon in ancient art. Bronze tools allowed artisans to refine plaster surfaces and prepare pigments. Potters crafted vessels decorated with swirling motifs inspired by marine life, perhaps reflecting the islanders' close relationship with the sea. Religious life also flourished in Crete. Shrines existed both within palaces and in natural settings such as caves and mountaintops. Ritual objects, lipid bowls, figurines, and ceremonial blades suggested a spiritual worldview rooted in harmony with nature and cycles of renewal. The Minoan religious system remains partly mysterious, but its symbols speak of reverence for life, movement, and balance. On mainland Greece, the early Mycenaean elites continued to rise in prominence. While still influenced by Minoan culture, they developed their own distinctive architectural and political style. In these centuries, leaders expanded their fortifications, established stronger administrative systems, and participated more actively in trade networks. Bronze weapons and armor became increasingly elaborate, reflecting a society that valued martial prowess and protective strength. Burials of elite individuals included bronze swords, gold ornaments, and precious objects imported from distant lands. Evidence of the Mycenaeans' growing influence and wealth. Further east, in the Yellow River Valley of ancient China, the Middle Bronze Age saw the growth of societies that would later form part of the Shang dynasty. Bronze casting techniques became highly refined, enabling artisans to create intricate vessels used in ancestor rituals. These vessels, heavily decorated with symmetrical patterns, stylized animal faces, and geometric designs, reflected a worldview centered on lineage, memory, and spiritual continuity. Rituals conducted using bronze vessels reinforced social hierarchy and strengthened bonds between living communities and their ancestors. In the Indus Valley, the Middle Bronze Age represented continuity rather than transformation. Cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro maintained their carefully planned layouts, featuring straight streets, standardized bricks, and advanced water systems. Bronze tools supported daily life, though the Indus people used a wider variety of materials, including copper, stone, and fired clay. Their trade networks continued to reach Mesopotamia, evidenced by seals and artifacts found far from the Indus region. Despite their complexity, these cities remained tranquil in appearance, marked by a sense of order and urban discipline that set them apart from other Bronze Age cultures. Across the regions of the Middle Bronze Age, a shared atmosphere of refinement and structure took shape. Civilizations did not merely expand, they matured. Governance became more systematic, architecture more ambitious, and artistic expression more subtle. Rituals grew in complexity, symbolizing deeper connections between human societies and the cosmic forces they revered. This maturity extended to the realms of diplomacy and international communication. The establishment of long-distance alliances allowed kingdoms to navigate political tensions peacefully. The exchange of princesses in marriage strengthened ties between royal families. Gift-giving, carried out with delicacy and protocol, affirmed mutual respect. These practices, while shaped by power dynamics, reflected a world in which diplomacy had become an art of its own. Even warfare, when it occurred, took on a more organized form. Armies grew larger, chariots more common, and fortresses more imposing. Yet these conflicts, though decisive in certain regions, did not overshadow the general atmosphere of cultural growth that characterized this era. The Middle Bronze Age, with its refined societies and interconnected world, laid essential groundwork for the centuries to come. The traditions established during this time, written law, organized administration, complex trade, sophisticated religion, and rich artistic expression, formed the basis of the Late Bronze Age, a period that would see some of the most dramatic events of ancient history. But before those events, the world continued its gentle expansion, its slow accumulation of knowledge, and its quiet unfolding beneath the steady rhythm of time. In the palaces of Crete, the temples of Egypt, the cities of Mesopotamia, and the highland fortresses of Anatolia, daily life moved in harmony with ancient patterns. Fields were plowed under the rising sun, merchants prepared their goods for long journeys, and priests lit incense as they recited prayers older than living memory. The Middle Bronze Age stood as a calm pinnacle of early civilization, a moment when ancient societies, confident in their knowledge and supported by centuries of refinement, shaped a world that felt deeply stable and quietly grand. As the Middle Bronze Age gave way to its later centuries, the ancient world entered a period of unprecedented scale and ambition. The Late Bronze Age, spanning roughly from 1550 to 1200 BCE, became one of the most interconnected eras in early history. Kingdoms expanded into empires. Palaces grew into sprawling administrative centers. Diplomatic letters traveled between courts, separated by hundreds of miles. Trade reached extraordinary distances, linking continents through routes that had evolved constantly since earlier ages. This period represented the maturity of the Bronze Age world, a time when civilizations reached their greatest heights before the quiet shadows of decline approached. Yet in this calm recounting of ancient events, the Late Bronze Age appears not as a dramatic climax, but as a gentle expansion, a final flowering of an age shaped by centuries of gradual growth. In Egypt, the Late Bronze Age aligned with the New Kingdom, a period remembered for its wealth, stability, and cultural brilliance. After an era of turmoil known as the Second Intermediate Period, Egypt reunited under strong rulers who expanded its influence far beyond the Nile Valley. Pharaohs such as Ahmose, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III, and Ramesses II presided over a land filled with monumental architecture, active diplomacy, and flourishing artistic expression. During these centuries, the city of Thebes emerged as one of the era's greatest spiritual centers. Temples dedicated to Amun, Mut, and Khonsu rose with quiet majesty along the riverbank, their columns carved with scenes of offerings, rituals, and cosmic order. Bronze tools shaped these grand structures, carving deep hieroglyphs, smoothing stone surfaces, and assisting craftsmen in the creation of statues, ceremonial objects, and household goods. While the temples appeared eternal in their stone silence, their construction depended on the steady rhythms of Bronze Age craftsmanship. The New Kingdom pharaohs extended Egypt's political reach across the Levant and into Nubia. Although military campaigns occurred, their purpose, within this calm retelling, was part of a larger diplomatic landscape. Egypt became an international power, communicating frequently with neighboring kingdoms. The famous Amarna letters, dating to this period, reveal a world connected through respect, formality, and exchange. These letters show Egyptian pharaohs corresponding with rulers of the Hittite Empire, the Kassite dynasty of Babylon, the Mitanni kingdom, the kings of Cyprus, city-state rulers across the Levant. Their tone was often ceremonial and cordial, filled with phrases referring to brotherhood, friendship, and the exchange of gifts. Gold, ivory, horses, textiles, and crafted bronze objects moved between these courts, strengthening diplomatic bonds. Marriages between royal families further solidified alliances, reflecting a political world built on relationships as much as on borders. While Egypt reached its height, the Minoan civilization on Crete underwent peaceful transformation. During the late Bronze Age, Crete's influence gradually flowed into mainland Greece. This transition was not sudden but gentle, occurring over generations. Mycenaean elites adopted Minoan styles, rituals, and writing, blending them with their own traditions. The palaces of Crete, Knossos, Phaistos, Malia, and Zakros, continued to flourish in the early part of this period. Their frescoes remained vibrant, showing scenes of the sea, ritual dances, and elegant figures moving in harmony with nature. Bronze tools enabled Minoan craftsmen to refine their pottery, jewelry, and metalwork. In their workshops, artisans shaped rhytons, ceremonial vessels carved from stone or molded from metal, and crafted intricate bronze figurines whose purposes remain partly mysterious. Crete's maritime network persisted as well. Minoan goods reached Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece. Ships continued to travel between islands, carrying pottery, textiles, and luxury goods. These sea routes formed the circulatory system of the Aegean world. On the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans grew steadily in strength. By the early late Bronze Age, they had become the dominant power in the Aegean. Their citadels, Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, Thebes, and others, expanded into formidable centers of administration, worship, and defense. Their palaces were structured around megarons, large halls with central hearths used for gatherings, rituals, and governance. Bronze tools and weapons played a prominent role in Mycenaean culture, reflecting a society where elite warriors held central importance. The Mycenaeans adopted and adapted the Minoans' writing system, creating Linear B, a script used to manage palace economies. These tablets recorded offerings to gods, distribution of goods, land ownership, and the responsibilities of workers. They preserve the earliest known written form of Greek, though used primarily for administration rather than literature. In the Levant, the cities of Ugarit, Byblos, and Tyre continued to serve as crucial links between empires. Ugarit, in particular, reached its own golden age. Its archives, containing texts in multiple languages, reflected the complex cultural interactions of the late Bronze Age. Its merchants traded with Cyprus, Egypt, the Hittites, and Mesopotamia. Its scribes wrote poetry, myths, and diplomatic records. The city's harbor welcomed ships laden with copper, tin, grain, oil, wine, and textiles. Farther inland, the kingdom of Mitanni flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates. Its rulers developed advanced systems of chariot warfare and maintained strong diplomatic ties with both Egypt and the Hittites. Though its political influence would eventually decline, the Middle and Late Bronze Age marked a period of cultural richness for the Mitanni, with art, ritual, and diplomacy forming the core of their society. In Mesopotamia, Babylon continued to thrive under various dynasties. Literature, mathematics, astronomy, and law all experienced advances during this period. Temples served as centers of ritual, economic administration, and intellectual activity. Bronze Age scribes preserved hymns, myths, medical texts, and incantations. Cities along the riverbanks produced pottery, textiles, and metalwork that traveled along trade routes stretching far beyond Mesopotamia. To the north, the Hittite Empire reached its imperial peak during the Late Bronze Age. Its capital, Hattusa, developed into a city of monumental scale. Massive walls encircled the city, decorated with gateways carved in reliefs of lions, warriors, and deities. Inside, palaces and temples filled the landscape, served by administrators, scribes, and artisans. The Hittites produced impressive bronze weaponry, chariots, spears, and swords that reflected their organized military and long defensive traditions. The Hittite rulers also preserved a vast archive of texts, from law codes to diplomacy, from myths to treaties. One of the most famous treaties of the Late Bronze Age, the peace agreement between the Hittites and the Egyptians, emerged from this period. Carved into stone in both lands, it stands as one of the earliest recorded international peace agreements in human history. It reflected a world that valued negotiation and stability, even amidst power. Across the Mediterranean, Cyprus continued to serve as a key supplier of copper. The island's mines were worked steadily, and its ports thrived with trade. Cyprus became known not only for copper, but for skilled metalwork, pottery, and timber. It acted as a cultural crossroads, absorbing influences from the Aegean, Levant, and Anatolia. In the interior of Anatolia, smaller kingdoms coexisted alongside the Hittites. Their traditions, though less recorded, contributed to the region's diversity. Fortified hilltop settlements, local temples, and regional artisan workshops added to the cultural mosaic of the Late Bronze Age. Farther east, the Late Bronze Age in China saw the flourishing of the Shang dynasty. This civilization produced some of the most intricate bronze vessels of the ancient world. Their casting techniques, using piece mold technology, allowed artisans to create complex shapes decorated with symmetrical patterns. These vessels played central roles in ancestor worship, connecting living communities to their respected dead. Rulers maintained large palaces, and oracle bones, scapulae or shells inscribed with questions and divine answers, revealed a world deeply tied to ritual and spiritual consultation. In the Indian subcontinent, the Indus Valley civilization experienced its later phase. Cities remained organized, though shifts in climate and river patterns may have begun affecting urban life. Even in its later centuries, the Indus produced distinctive pottery, beads, seals, and metalwork. The quiet discipline of their city planning continued to be evident in the careful grid-like layouts and advanced drainage systems. This Late Bronze Age world, though vast and diverse, was unified by shared rhythms. Across continents, people woke to tend fields, prepare goods, or carry out rituals. Caravans continued their long journeys through deserts. Ships glided across calm seas, carrying copper, tin, grain, and textiles. Scribes shaped tablets. Kings held audiences. Priests oversaw ceremonies, and artisans refined their crafts. At the height of this era, the world felt full, balanced, and interconnected. The Bronze Age, which had begun with the quiet casting of metal tools in small riverbank villages, had grown into a global network of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Yet even as the Late Bronze Age reached its peak, subtle changes began to stir beneath the surface, changes that would eventually contribute to a slow unraveling. Climate shifts, migrations, internal pressures, and shifts in trade patterns would all play roles in the transformation to come. But in this moment, this golden phase of empires and palaces, the world rested in a state of steady grandeur. The Late Bronze Age stood as a testament to humanity's capacity for organization, creativity, and connection. It represented the culmination of centuries of shared effort, a tapestry woven from countless lives across countless lands. And in the calm retelling of history, this era appears not as a dramatic peak, but as a quiet, expansive horizon, one that stretched across the ancient world with dignity, balance, and the soft glow of early civilization at its most developed stage. As the Late Bronze Age reached its height, the great kingdoms and palaces of the ancient world existed not in isolation, but within landscapes shaped by millions of quiet, ordinary lives. While kings corresponded through tablets, while merchants journeyed across seas, and while temples rose with monumental stone and bronze, the daily existence of most people unfolded slowly, gently, in rhythms guided by seasons, family, and the steady work that sustained their communities. These rhythms, often unseen in the grand narratives of history, formed the true foundation of Bronze Age civilization. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Aegean, Anatolia, the Levant, and beyond, life followed similar patterns of dawn and dusk, planting and harvest, gathering and ritual. Though each region possessed its own customs, languages, and religious expressions, the daily experience of ordinary people shared a quiet universality. The sound of footsteps on packed earth, the scent of bread rising in clay ovens, the creak of wooden tools, and the murmur of voices in small homes where families gathered each evening. In Mesopotamia, where the earliest urban centers had emerged centuries before, daily life was shaped by the presence of city walls, bustling streets, and canals that wound like slow-moving veins through districts of houses and workshops. Houses were typically built from sun-dried mud brick, arranged around small courtyards that opened to the sky. These courtyards were the heart of the home, places where families cooked, performed small tasks, and gathered in the cool hours of morning and evening. Bronze tools supported the peaceful routines of Mesopotamian life. Farmers used bronze sickles to harvest grain, while craftsmen employed bronze chisels, awls, and knives in their work. Potters shaped clay on spinning wheels, their hands steady as they produced vessels for cooking, storage, and ritual. Weavers created textiles using looms whose wooden frames stood in courtyards or workshops. Bakers ground grain in stone querns, kneading dough with practiced ease. The daily life of women encompassed weaving, grinding grain, caring for children, brewing beer, and managing household tasks. Men tended fields, herded animals, crafted goods, or worked on construction projects. Children played in alleys and courtyards, learning their future roles through gradual participation in daily tasks. And livestock, goats, sheep, cattle, moved through city streets in calm procession, contributing to both diet and economy. Temples occupied a central place in Mesopotamian cities. Their courtyards, storerooms, and ceremonial chambers represented not only religious centers, but hubs of economic activity. Offerings of grain, oil, wool, and livestock passed through temple hands, supporting both ritual and administration. Priests moved with purposeful calm through these spaces, tending altars, preparing incense, and reciting hymns that linked the mortal world with the divine. Across the desert and along the Nile, daily life in Egypt flowed in harmony with the seasonal flooding of the river. The rise and fall of the Nile shaped every aspect of existence, determining when fields could be plowed, when seeds could be sown, and when harvest could take place. In villages of mud brick houses clustered near the river, Mornings began with a soft glow of daylight reflecting across the water. Farmers walked toward fields with tools balanced over their shoulders, accompanied by oxen whose steady pace helped turn the earth. In Egypt, bronze tools had become essential for carpentry, agriculture, and craft production. Woodworkers shaped elegant furniture, stools, beds, chests, using bronze saws and chisels. Scribes used bronze-tipped tools to smooth writing surfaces. Artisans fashioned beads, jewelry, and figurines from bronze or copper, working in workshops filled with the scent of charcoal and melted metal. Women participated actively in the economy, weaving linen cloth, preparing food, and managing family affairs. Children watched their parents' movements, learning through imitation. In the evenings, families shared simple meals of bread, vegetables, fish, and beer. Life in Egypt carried a sense of stability rooted deeply in tradition. Rituals marked each stage of existence: birth, coming of age, marriage, and death. Offerings placed in household shrines reminded families that ancestors remained part of daily life. In the villages and towns of Anatolia, life unfolded near hillside fortresses and agricultural terraces. People lived in homes constructed from stone and timber, their walls thick enough to withstand seasonal weather. Bronze played a vital role here as well. Farmers used bronze-tipped plows, while warriors carried bronze swords and spearheads. Workshops near palaces or fortified sites produced pottery, metalwork, and tools essential for daily tasks. In these regions, families raised sheep and goats, whose wool and milk contributed to trade and diet. Shepherds moved flocks along mountain paths, greeting the morning light as they guided animals to higher pastures in summer and lower fields in winter. Women spun wool into thread using drop spindles, producing textiles that served as both clothing and trade goods. The quiet sound of spinning whorls turning filled many households, a rhythmic reminder of daily work. In the Aegean world, particularly on Crete and mainland Greece, life reflected the influence of palatial centers. In Minoan towns, narrow streets wound past workshops, shrines, and homes built in harmonious clusters. People engaged in craft production, agriculture, and maritime activities. Bronze knives sliced through fruits. Bronze fishhooks glinted under morning light as fishermen prepared nets along the shore. Cretan frescoes depict scenes of daily life infused with movement. Processions, dances, and athletic activities. These scenes suggest a society that valued celebration, physical grace, and ceremonial rhythm. Though only fragments of this world survive, they hint at the subtle elegance that shaped Minoan culture. Daily life in Crete was likely filled with tasks connected to the palace economy: weaving, baking, metalworking, pottery production, and the tending of animals. On the Greek mainland, Mycenaean communities lived in towns surrounding fortified citadels. Farmers, herders, and craftsmen supported the palace economy, providing goods and services in return for protection and stability. Bronze weaponry, already well developed, reflected a society in which warrior elites played key roles. Yet beyond the world of elite burials and warfare, ordinary people lived quiet lives shaped by farming, weaving, and trade. In these households, clay hearths warmed rooms, and simple pottery vessels held daily meals. In the Levant, people lived along coastlines dotted with harbors, in inland valleys rich with orchards, and near mountains where timber was harvested. Daily life involved fishing, agriculture, woodworking, and trade. Bronze tools supported carpentry and metalwork, while pottery kilns glowed faintly at dawn and dusk. The scent of olive oil, wine, and incense often filled the markets of coastal towns. Families gathered each evening in courtyards open to the sky, sharing food prepared in clay ovens and speaking of events in a world connected by sea routes. Across the ancient world, the Bronze Age was not defined solely by kings and palaces, but by the thousands of small actions carried out each day. The sowing of seeds, the shaping of vessels, the weaving of cloth, the herding of animals. Each task contributed to the economic and cultural stability that sustained great civilizations. Religion also played a central role in everyday existence. In Egypt, people visited neighborhood shrines to ask for protection or offer thanks. In Mesopotamia, households maintained small altars dedicated to protective spirits. In the Aegean, rituals connected communities to natural forces. In Anatolia, local deities, storm gods, sun goddesses, and ancestral spirits received offerings in hillside sanctuaries. In the Levant, people honored a variety of gods associated with fertility, weather, and maritime life. These rituals, though small in scale, reflected the worldview shared by Bronze Age societies, the belief that the divine shaped every aspect of the natural world. Rainfall, harvest, birth, illness, and the rising of the sun were part of a cosmic order maintained through respect, prayer, and offerings. Craft production formed another cornerstone of Bronze Age life. Artisans specialized in shaping metal, stone, pottery, and textiles. Each workshop carried the sense of its materials: charcoal and molten metal in foundries, clay and earth in potters' rooms, wool and linen in weaving spaces. Bronze workers refined their skill across generations, learning the exact temperatures needed to melt metal and the precise timing required to pour it into molds. Potters developed designs that reflected regional aesthetics: geometric patterns in Greece, swirling motifs in Crete, narrative scenes in Egypt, and symbolic seals in Mesopotamia. Even the quiet work of merchants played a key role in daily life. Shops and market stalls lined the streets of many Bronze Age towns, offering goods from near and far: grain, beer, pottery, textiles, incense, metal tools, and small luxury items. Ships arrived in harbors with goods that traveled remarkable distances, while caravan routes connected inland towns to coastal regions. These networks supported families, artisans, and the palace administrations that coordinated the flow of goods. In villages far from urban centers, daily tasks followed the natural pace of the seasons. Farmers watched the weather, herders observed the behavior of their animals, and communities shared work during planting and harvest. In these rural areas, life moved at a gentle tempo. Evenings were illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps, mornings by the warmth of the rising sun over fields awaiting cultivation. Children in the Bronze Age learned gradually through immersion in family life. They watched adults weave, cook, build, and herd. They played with toys shaped from clay or carved from wood. They learned songs, stories, and rituals passed down through generations. Some learned specialized skills from artisans or scribes, while others followed traditions tied to family fields or flocks. Across every region, the rhythms of work, ritual, and rest gave life stability. While palaces grew in splendor and trade networks connected distant lands, the Bronze Age remained deeply rooted in the quiet routines of ordinary people. These routines gave shape to society, nourished economies, and maintained traditions that stretched far into the future. By understanding the daily life of this era, one glimpses the heart of the Bronze Age. Not through grand monuments alone, but through the soft, continual flow of human experience. A world of simple meals, handcrafted tools, shared stories, early mornings in the fields, and evenings spent under open skies. This was the world that sustained the great kingdoms, the world that fed the palaces, the world that filled temples with offerings, and the world that, generation after generation, passed its knowledge forward in quiet continuity. The Late Bronze Age stood not only on the achievements of kings, but on the steady, peaceful labor of millions of people who lived their lives beneath its broad horizon. As the Late Bronze Age matured into one of the most interconnected periods of early history, the ancient world came alive with movement. Across oceans, along rivers, through mountain passes, and over broad plains, people traveled with a sense of purpose shaped by trade, diplomacy, ritual, and simple necessity. These journeys, though undertaken slowly and with great patience, formed the unseen threads that bound the Bronze Age world into a coherent whole. While many lived their entire lives in villages or cities close to home, a significant portion of the Bronze Age economy depended on those who traveled. Sailors navigating open waters, merchants guiding long caravans, and messengers carrying letters across vast distances. Their routes formed a network of paths, ports, and resting places that allowed goods, ideas, and traditions to move quietly from one civilization to another. The Mediterranean Sea served as one of the primary highways of the Bronze Age. Its waters, calm during certain seasons and unpredictable at others, supported fleets of ships that connected Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, Cyprus, Crete, and mainland Greece. The ships that crossed these waters were built with sturdy wooden hulls, their timbers shaped by bronze tools in shipyards that hummed with steady activity. Their sails, woven from linen or wool, caught the wind as they glided across the glittering surface of the sea. The sailors of the Bronze Age lived lives shaped by rhythm. The rhythm of waves, the shifting winds, and the rise and fall of the stars. They navigated by watching the heavens, learning the movements of constellations that guided them through night and season. During the day, they steered by the sun and the shape of distant coastlines. Though they lacked the instruments of later ages, their understanding of weather, water, and navigation was profound, passed down through generations of seafaring families. Minoan ships sailed from Crete to Egypt and the Levant, their sleek designs making them some of the most elegant vessels of the ancient world. In frescoes from Akrotiri in Crete, one sees ships painted with bright colors, reds, whites, and blues, showing rows of oarsmen seated in harmony, moving their oars in unison. These images capture not only the artistry of the Minoans, but the strong maritime spirit that defined their culture. Aegean sailors carried pottery, textiles, and metal goods across the sea, returning with items such as grain, papyrus, ivory, and incense. Their journeys linked the Aegean islands in quiet circuits, creating a web of exchange that spread cultural motifs, religious symbols, and craft practices. Bronze Age harbors, some natural, some shaped by human effort, became scenes of gentle clamoring as ships arrived, unloaded, and departed again. In the Levant, harbors served as bustling hubs of maritime activity. Cities such as Byblos, Ugarit, and Tyre welcomed ships from many lands. Sailors moored their vessels to wooden posts, carrying goods onto docks lined with warehouses and marketplaces. Merchants greeted them with calm familiarity, inspecting items and negotiating exchanges. In these bustling but orderly ports, languages from across the Bronze Age world mingled. Egyptian, Akkadian, Hittite, Cypriot, and Aegean dialects blended in the steady hum of commerce. From the Levant, goods traveled inland through desert routes guided by caravans of donkeys. These caravans moved slowly but steadily, carrying copper, tin, grain, oil, wine, textiles, and crafted objects. Merchants and their animals followed paths marked by stones, wells, and occasional rest stops where travelers refreshed themselves under the shade of date palms. Caravan masters knew the land intimately, its springs, its valleys, and its patterns of wind and weather. Across the vast landscapes of Mesopotamia, travel followed the course of rivers. Boats made of wood and bitumen drifted down the Euphrates and Tigris, carrying grain, pottery, and textiles. These rivers functioned as ancient highways, their gentle currents linking city to city. Where rivers could not reach, land routes connected communities through paths worn by countless travelers. Messengers delivering tablets between kingdoms knew these routes well, and their journeys contributed to the stable communication that defined the Late Bronze Age. In Egypt, the Nile remained the main thoroughfare of the kingdom. Boats gliding along its waters carried goods, officials, and laborers between distant towns. Sails caught the breeze blowing south, while the river's current carried vessels north toward the delta. The river allowed life to flow with gentle ease, supporting both local and long-distance travel. Travelers passing along the Nile saw temples rising on its banks, fields stretching outward in well-tended rows, and villages nestled close to the protective flow of water. To the south of Egypt, Nubian traders and travelers moved along routes that connected Africa to the broader Bronze Age world. Caravans brought gold, ebony, ivory, and exotic goods to Egyptian markets, linking faraway lands to the centers of late Bronze Age power. These exchanges helped shape the cultural diversity of the era, as distant regions contributed to the palette of materials and ideas circulating across continents. In Anatolia, the rugged landscape offered countless mountain passes and valleys that formed the region's internal routes. Travelers moved between fortified towns, each perched on high ground to oversee the surrounding lands. Bronze Age roads in this region were not paved, but were shaped over time by repeated movement. Traders, messengers, and artisans traveled these paths with patient determination, crossing rivers and hills with goods that would feed local economies and palace storerooms. The Hittite Empire maintained a network of royal roads that connected its major cities. These routes enabled the rapid movement of envoys, officials, and goods from one part of the empire to another. Along them, way stations provided rest and water for travelers. These roads also served as channels for communication between the Hittite court and its vassal states. Clay tablets carried by couriers allowed the king to send instructions, receive reports, and maintain the cohesion of a vast and varied realm. Farther east, in the lands of Central Asia and Persia, long routes carried tin, precious stones, and other goods toward the cities of Mesopotamia. Caravans traversed arid landscapes, reaching oases that served as hubs for exchange. These routes played a crucial role in supplying the Bronze Age world with the tin necessary for bronze production. Without these long-distance networks, the alloy that defined the era would not have been possible. In the Indus Valley, roads and river routes connected cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Boats traveled along rivers, carrying grain, pottery, and other goods between urban centers. Overland routes linked the Indus region to Afghanistan, where lapis lazuli mines provided one of the Bronze Age's most prized stones. From Afghanistan, lapis traveled westward to Mesopotamia and beyond, appearing in jewelry, inlays, and ritual objects across the ancient world. The journey of this deep blue stone exemplified the vast extent of Bronze Age trade. In ancient China, during the Shang dynasty, royal processions, traders, and messengers traveled between walled settlements that dotted the Yellow River Valley. Carts pulled by oxen and horses moved along early roads, carrying goods and materials essential for bronze casting. These routes linked communities in a landscape shaped by ancestral worship, ritual centers, and the early formation of Chinese statecraft. The movement of goods across all these regions often required multiple stages. A single item, a copper ingot, a jar of oil, a bolt of linen, or a carved figurine, might pass through many hands before reaching its final destination. It might travel by ship along the Mediterranean, by caravan through a desert, by riverboat along the Tigris, and finally through city gates into palace storerooms. Each stage of this journey added layers of meaning to the object's history, embedding it within the broader network of Bronze Age civilization. In many regions, travel was accompanied by ritual. Before beginning long journeys, travelers made offerings at shrines, asking for protection from river spirits, mountain deities, or storm gods. Upon returning safely, they left tokens of gratitude. These rituals reinforced the belief that travel, like agriculture, birth, and death, existed within a sacred framework that required acknowledgement and respect. While merchants and sailors traveled far, most people experienced movement on a smaller scale. Farmers traveled between fields and village markets. Craftsmen carried goods from workshops to town squares. Priests traveled to neighboring shrines to perform rituals. Children accompanied parents to fields or wells. These local movements, though less dramatic than long-distance voyages, contributed to the sense of life as a continuous flow, a quiet journey through familiar landscapes. In coastal regions, fishermen ventured onto the sea each morning, guiding small boats with bronze-tipped nets and wooden oars. Their work relied on an intimate knowledge of tides, currents, and the behavior of fish. In inland valleys, shepherds guided flocks through pastures, following routes shaped by generations of pastoral tradition. In forested areas, woodcutters traveled to gather timber, shaping logs with bronze axes. On the broad plains of Mesopotamia, travelers often encountered canals lined with reeds, fields of barley swaying in the wind, and distant ziggurats rising like stepped mountains. In Egypt, they passed fields glowing under the desert sun, with the Nile drifting peacefully beside them. In the Aegean, rocky hillsides met the sparkling sea, with olive groves and vineyards dotting the landscape. Each region offered its own quiet beauty, a beauty experienced intimately by those who traveled regularly across its terrain. The sounds of Bronze Age travel were subtle. The splash of oars against water, the soft padding of donkey hooves across dirt, the clinking of bronze tools, and the murmur of voices speaking languages of distant lands. These sounds formed the background music of an interconnected world. In this gentle rhythm, travelers exchanged greetings, shared stories, and passed along information that connected their communities to the broader world. The Late Bronze Age, in all its complexity, relied on movement, not loud or chaotic movement, but slow, steady, purposeful travel that unfolded across centuries. Through ships, caravans, and footpaths, the world became a tapestry of connected regions. Goods, ideas, technologies, and beliefs traveled constantly, shaping the identities of civilizations. In the calm retelling of history, these journeys appear not as dramatic adventures, but as quiet paths across ancient landscapes, followed by countless travelers who contributed in small and steady ways to the shared story of humanity. As the Bronze Age world reached its full splendor, its civilizations were not shaped by metal and trade alone. Beneath the architecture of palaces, beneath the rhythms of agriculture and the quiet exchanges of merchants, lay a deeper foundation, one formed from myth, belief, and the ever-present sense that the divine touched every aspect of life. Across continents, people looked upward to the heavens, inward to the soul, and outward to the landscape to understand their place in a world guided by forces beyond human control. The spiritual life of the Bronze Age was not separate from daily existence. It was woven gently through every dawn prayer, every temple ritual, every seasonal festival, and every decision made in the halls of kings. In Mesopotamia, where some of the earliest cities rose beneath the wide arc of the sky, belief formed a vast, intricate tapestry. The great gods, Anu, Enlil, and Enki, watched over heaven, storm, and wisdom. Inanna presided over love and war, her presence invoked in both tenderness and conflict. Every city had its patron deity whose temple rose at its heart. These temples, built with mud brick and decorated with bronze fittings and carved stone, stood as both spiritual and administrative centers. Their terraces, courtyards, and sanctuaries formed a sacred landscape within the city walls. Priests and priestesses moved through these spaces with calm reverence. Their rituals marked the passage of time. Monthly offerings, seasonal festivals, and annual ceremonies that aligned with the cycles of agriculture and celestial movement. Incense drifted through temple corridors, carrying prayers to the gods. Clay tablets preserved hymns that sang of divine journeys, cosmic order, and the relationships between gods and mortals. These texts offered insight into a worldview in which human life depended on maintaining harmony with celestial powers. The myths of Mesopotamia told of creation from the mingling of waters, of battles between gods and primordial forces, and of heroic journeys through heavenly and underworld realms. The Epic of Gilgamesh, whose roots extended deep into the Bronze Age, spoke of kingship, mortality, and the search for meaning. In its dreamlike narrative, one sees the concerns of a civilization both ancient and wise. Questions about death, friendship, and the nature of existence. Such stories were not merely entertainment. They held spiritual weight, shaping cultural identity and moral understanding. In Egypt, spirituality was equally profound, but expressed through a different lens. Here, gods took forms rooted in the natural world. Sun disk, falcon, jackal, lioness, ibis, and cow, each representing forces essential to cosmic harmony. The Egyptians saw the world as a carefully balanced structure, maintained through ritual, truth, and divine order known as Ma'at. Pharaohs, viewed as living embodiments of the divine, carried the responsibility of preserving Ma'at through governance, offerings, and temple building. Temples dedicated to Amun, Ra, Hathor, Osiris, and countless other deities filled the landscape with sacred architecture. Their columns, painted in soft hues, rose like stone forests. Their walls, carved with ritual scenes, told stories of creation, death, and rebirth. Statues of gods and ancestors inhabited quiet sanctuaries lit by flickering lamps. Every action within a temple followed a ritual sequence believed to mirror cosmic events. Priests washed statues with care, offered food to the gods, recited hymns, and opened portals between the world of humans and the world of the divine. The myths of Egypt emphasized cycles. Cycles of the sun, the river, and the afterlife. The god Ra journeyed across the sky each day and through the underworld each night, confronting forces of chaos before rising again in radiance. Osiris ruled the realm of the dead with gentle fairness, offering hope to all who sought eternal life. These stories comforted Egyptians, assuring them that life continued beyond death in a realm guided by order and peace. Burial rituals, coffins adorned with spells, and amulets shaped from bronze and faience reflected this spiritual worldview. To the northwest, on the island of Crete, the Minoan religion blended natural imagery with ceremonial grace. Shrines existed both within palaces and in caves, groves, and mountaintops. The goddess, likely the central figure of Minoan spirituality, appeared in many forms, as a guardian of nature, as a divine protector holding snakes, or as a radiant figure associated with mountains and animals. Bulls played symbolic roles in rituals, their imagery appearing in frescoes, rings, and vessels. The true meaning of these symbols remains partly hidden, like a dream preserved in fragments. but their calm beauty suggests a worldview attuned to balance, dance, and reverence for nature. Minoan rituals may have included dancing, feasting, libations, and processions. The frescoes at Knossos, Phaistos, and Akrotiri depict graceful figures moving with fluidity, suggesting religious ceremonies rooted in movement rather than warfare. Bronze tools shape the ceremonial objects used in these rites: figurines, rhytons, leaves, and jewelry crafted with exceptional artistry. On mainland Greece, early Mycenaean religion blended local traditions with influences from Minoan Crete. Shrines contained offerings to gods later known in classical Greece: Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and others, though their Bronze Age forms differed from those familiar today. Linear B tablets record offerings to deities whose names echo through later mythology. Rituals took place in palace megarons, or outdoor spaces, guided by priests and officials. Mycenaean belief reflected a society shaped by warrior elites, yet grounded in deep respect for divine order. Farther north and east, in the highlands of Anatolia, the Hittite Empire preserved a vast array of myths and rituals. Their pantheon included storm gods, sun goddesses, and countless local deities associated with mountains, rivers, and cities. The Hittite kings performed elaborate rituals meant to secure divine favor. Texts describe ceremonies involving offerings, hymns, prayers, and symbolic reenactments of mythic events. Bronze tools played essential roles in these rituals: knives for sacrifices, bowls for libations, and figurines used in symbolic acts. The Hittites also preserved myths from older Anatolian and Mesopotamian traditions. Their stories tell of divine councils, cosmic conflicts, and the cycles of nature. Many myths centered on the storm god and the interaction between celestial forces and the earthly realm. These tales, though distant in time, reveal a culture deeply engaged with questions of order, balance, and renewal. In the Levant, religious life was shaped by local traditions and influences from neighboring civilizations. Deities associated with weather, fertility, the sea, and craftsmanship played central roles in rituals. Shrines dotted coastal towns, while temples in major cities supported priests who performed offerings to gods linked with the rhythms of agriculture and maritime life. Texts from Ugarit reveal a rich pantheon, including Baal, Asherah, El, and Anat, figures whose myths describe the changing seasons, the cycles of life and death, and the cosmic battles that defined existence. The Ugaritic texts, written in a cuneiform alphabet, include hymns, rituals, and myths that offer a window into Bronze Age spirituality. These narratives reflect a world where divine beings guided storms, fertility, and the order of creation. Rituals involved both personal and communal acts: offerings at household shrines, ceremonies in temple courtyards, and celebrations tied to the agricultural calendar. In the Indus Valley, religion remains mysterious due to the undeciphered writing system. Yet archaeological finds, seals depicting animals, horned figures, and sacred trees, suggest a symbolic world connected to nature, perhaps emphasizing fertility, protection, and cosmic order. Ritual bathing and careful urban planning indicate a culture that valued purity and spiritual discipline. In ancient China, during the Shang dynasty, religion centered on ancestor worship and divination. Kings served as intermediaries between the living and the ancestral spirits. Bronze vessels, decorated with intricate patterns, held offerings during rituals. Oracle bones played a key role in spiritual life. Questions carved into these bones were posed to ancestor spirits or deities, and the resulting cracks from heated bones were interpreted as answers. These rituals formed a spiritual system deeply connected to governance, family, and cosmic harmony. Across all these lands, Belief shaped not only rituals, but the worldview of the entire Bronze Age. People lived with the understanding that the universe was governed by unseen forces. Every river, mountain, storm, and autumn harvest was part of a larger cosmic order. Religious festivals aligned with the changing seasons, celebrating planting and harvest, honoring ancestors, calling for rain, and giving thanks for life. Temples, shrines, and sacred places formed the physical landscapes of Bronze Age spirituality. These spaces offered points of connection between humans and the divine. They were carefully constructed using bronze tools, stone blocks, timber, and plaster. Murals, carvings, and statues decorated their interiors, creating atmospheres of both awe and intimacy. The rituals performed in these spaces followed patterns older than memory. Priests lit oil lamps, their flames casting gentle shadows on walls. Musicians played lyres, flutes, and drums during festivals. Dancers moved in circles, mimicking the rhythms of nature. Offerings of grain, incense, fruit, and wine were placed on altars. In some cultures, worshippers approached gods through prayer or meditation. In others, through ceremonial movement or symbolic reenactments of mythic events. In many regions, myths played roles in agricultural cycles. Tales of dying and rising gods, of seasonal journeys, and of cosmic battles reflected the changing landscape. Dry seasons, rainy seasons, the flooding of rivers, and the renewal of crops. These stories comforted communities, offering explanations for natural events and reaffirming the belief that life followed predictable cycles. The Bronze Age spiritual world, though rich with diversity, shared a sense of harmony. It presented existence as a balance between humans and the divine, between the seen and the unseen, between life and the cycles that carried it toward transformation. Across great distances, cultures expressed this shared sense through different symbols, different gods, and different rituals. Yet their worldview remained fundamentally aligned. In the calm retelling of history, this sacred landscape appears as a soft glow beneath the surface of Bronze Age life. It shaped every decision, inspired every monument, and guided every community. It provided meaning to the rhythms of daily work and comfort to the mysteries of birth and death. As the late Bronze Age approached its final centuries, the spiritual traditions that had guided generations continued to offer stability. But beneath this stability, quiet changes stirred. Changes in climate, trade, migration, and politics. Yet for a time, the sacred world of the Bronze Age remained steady, illuminated by temples, sustained by rituals, and held gently by the myths that echoed across ancient landscapes. As the late Bronze Age entered its final centuries, the ancient world still moved with the same steady rhythms that had shaped it for more than 1,000 years. Fields blossomed beneath familiar suns. Ships glided across well-traveled seas, scribes pressed signs into clay tablets, and priests lit lamps before altars where offerings rested quietly. Palaces rose above towns, temples anchored spiritual life, and trade routes continued their long, meandering paths across mountains, deserts, and open waters. Nothing in the daily lives of most people suggested that the age that had defined early civilization was approaching transformation. Yet history often changes not in dramatic moments, but through slow shifts, gradual transitions that unfold over generations. And so it was with the Bronze Age. Its ending was not a single event, but a gentle unwinding of ancient connections, a quiet rebalancing of economies and landscapes. The causes were many. Small climate shifts, demographic movement, evolving trade patterns, internal reorganizations, and the natural cycle of cultural renewal. All these influences blended softly across time, shaping the transition from one era to the next. In the Eastern Mediterranean, subtle changes began to affect agricultural cycles. Some regions may have experienced periods of reduced rainfall, leading to shifting harvest patterns. Farmers, whose understanding of the land extended across generations, adapted as best they could, altering planting times, seeking new water sources, and adjusting their flocks and herds. These adjustments were not abrupt, but slowly became part of the lived experience of many communities. As environmental patterns shifted, populations moved gradually across landscapes. Families seeking fertile land or new opportunities migrated from one valley to another, from one coastline to a distant region. These movements were not invasions or dramatic displacements, but the simple, timeless flow of human communities adjusting to changing circumstances. Over time, the cumulative effect of these migrations altered the demographic makeup of certain regions, blending languages, customs, and practices. Trade, the lifeblood of the Bronze Age, also experienced gradual redirection. The long-distance routes that had connected regions for centuries began to change as new centers emerged and others diminished. Some harbors lost their prominence as coastlines shifted, or as ships sought alternate paths. Caravan routes adapted to new settlements, new alliances, and new economic demands. The flow of tin, the rare metal essential for bronze, grew more unpredictable. As sources fluctuated and merchants altered their routes, the availability of bronze slowly narrowed, encouraging communities to explore alternate materials. In some regions, iron, long known but rarely used, gradually entered wider circulation. Iron required different techniques to forge, and early iron tools were not always superior to bronze. Yet iron's greater availability made it increasingly attractive to societies adjusting to changes in metal supply. Over generations, smiths learned to work iron more effectively. Its presence, still modest at first, hinted at the transformations that would eventually define the next era. The great palatial centers that had flourished during the height of the late Bronze Age faced their own quiet transitions. In Crete, the Minoan palaces experienced changes in leadership, architectural style, and regional influence. Some sites were gradually abandoned, while others continued in altered form. This evolution reflected the natural ebb and flow of power in complex societies. On mainland Greece, the Mycenaean palaces began to shift as well. Economic networks became more localized, and administrative systems changed focus. While the grand halls and storerooms of earlier centuries still played roles in governance, their influence gradually lessened. Communities outside palace centers grew more independent, forming new patterns of leadership and trade. In Anatolia, the Hittite Empire experienced slow changes in its internal structure. Administrative centers faced pressures from shifting alliances, environmental conditions, and the gradual movement of populations along the empire's frontiers. Over time, some of the smaller kingdoms once integrated into the Hittite administrative model began to follow their own paths again, guided by local traditions. Along the Levantine coast, cities such as Ugarit continued to flourish for a time, maintaining their cosmopolitan character. Yet as trade patterns shifted, their role within the broader network evolved. Some ports grew quieter, others found new significance. The patterns of maritime exchange remained, but their focus slowly reoriented. In Mesopotamia, cities that had thrived for centuries experienced cycles of decline and renewal. Some regions saw administrative centers move to new locations. Others shifted their agricultural focus or adapted to changed water patterns along the rivers. Through each transition, temples, scribes, and artisans continued their work, preserving older traditions while quietly adapting to new realities. Across the broader Bronze Age world, the transitions that marked the era's end were rarely abrupt. They unfolded gently, carried forward by the rhythm of daily life. Families still harvested grain, shaped pottery, wove textiles, and tended animals. Children still learned through observation and participation. Markets continued to hum with quiet activity. Rituals continued to mark the seasons and honor the gods. Even in the regions where change came more suddenly, the broader pattern of transformation remained one of renewal rather than collapse. Communities reorganized, adapting their social structures. Smaller settlements grew where larger centers had once dominated. Local traditions became more prominent as long-distance connections fluctuated. In Egypt, the new kingdom gradually transitioned into later dynasties. The great monuments of earlier centuries remained standing, their stone surfaces absorbing the sun as they had for generations. Priests continued to oversee rituals, scribes maintained administrative records, and farmers tended fields along the Nile. Life moved with the same quiet steadiness that had always guided the land. In the highlands of Anatolia, new peoples settled in regions once held by the Hittites. Their arrival blended older local traditions with emerging cultural forms. These transitions marked the beginning of new societies that would define the next era of history. Along the Mediterranean, maritime communities adapted to altered political landscapes. Some ports took on new significance. Others shifted their focus toward local or regional trade. Ships continued to travel across the sea, carrying goods that connected communities with familiar reliability. In the Levant, smaller coastal towns grew as anchors for continuity, preserving traditions, crafts, and religious practices that stretched back deep into the Bronze Age. Their artisans continued to shape pottery, weave cloth, and cast bronze tools long after the era's broader networks had transformed. In the Aegean, the stories and memories of the Mycenaean world lingered in oral traditions that would later inspire epics. Though the palaces themselves changed, the cultural identities they supported continued through song, ritual, and craft. Across all these lands, the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age appeared not as an ending, but as a quiet shift, an evolution shaped by environmental adjustments, social adaptation, and technological change. Historians sometimes call this period the Bronze Age collapse. But in a gentle retelling designed for rest and reflection, it is better understood as a natural transformation, a soft turning of history's great wheel. Civilizations do not vanish in moments. They change shape, redirect their energies, and reorganize their communities. The Bronze Age world, so deeply interconnected and beautifully complex, did not fall into silence. It continued, transformed into new forms and new cultures. As iron tools became more common, societies built upon the knowledge accumulated during centuries of Bronze Age innovation. Writing systems, artistic traditions, religious practices, and architectural techniques persisted, woven into the fabric of later civilizations. The people of these emerging worlds carried with them the memory of earlier ages. Stories of gods, heroes, journeys, and rituals. In this way, the legacy of the Bronze Age endured. Its trade routes became the foundations for later commerce. Its diplomatic traditions influenced later empires. Its religious systems shaped mythologies that survived for millennia. Its cities, even when rebuilt or relocated, continued to influence the landscapes around them. And its spirit, one of creativity, connection, and quiet perseverance, lived on in every culture that followed. As the ancient world transitioned gently into the Iron Age, the achievements of the Bronze Age remained like stones beneath a river. steady, foundational, and timeless. They formed the bedrock upon which the next eras would walk, supporting new expressions of culture while retaining the subtle memory of all that came before. In the calm reflection of history, the end of the Bronze Age appears not as a moment of darkness, but as a soft twilight leading toward a new dawn. Fields continued to rustle under the wind. Ships continued to cross the sea. Temples continued to receive offerings, and families continued to live their lives beneath ancient skies. The story of the Bronze Age, from its earliest experiments in metalworking to its vast networks of trade and diplomacy, remains one of humanity's first great chapters. A chapter written slowly across centuries, shaped by countless hands and carried forward through time by the enduring rhythms of daily life. And in the stillness of this retelling, the age rests now like a distant memory, peaceful, luminous, and gently woven into the long tapestry of human history.